The notice that my daughter was being expelled from school was placed in my hands, and the reason, cheating with a smartwatch, was glaringly harsh. I stormed into the school to argue my case, only to be publicly humiliated by the homeroom teacher and the principal. Children from single-parent families lack discipline. It's only natural for them to have bad character. The evidence is conclusive. If you keep making a scene, watch out, you might even lose that easy little job of yours. I looked at the red marks on my daughter's wrist from being shoved during the argument, and at those hollow eyes full of despair. Then I picked up the phone and dialed the number that had been buried away for 6 years. Daniel Shaw, my voice was ice cold. Our daughter is being bullied. I only have one question. What do you gain by forcing a child who loves studying to death and destroying your own bloodline for the world you're trying to protect? The line went dead silent, and then a voice sounded from the other end, as if it had come straight from the depths of hell. Send me the address. I'm on my way. The smell of old paper and ink in the records room was the quiet comfort I had known best for the past 6 years. I was 33 this year, an ordinary librarian at the city library. Life was tight, but I thought it was enough to protect the peace between me and my daughter, Stella. Until that dark afternoon, when a sharp ringtone tore through the fake calm. The call was from Stella's homeroom teacher, Miss Turner, and her tone was cold and mechanical. Parent of Stella Carter, please come to the school immediately. We need to speak to you in person about Stella Carter's serious violation of school rules. School rules? My heart sank hard. Stella, she. Come here first. The call was hung up, leaving only the buzzing of the dial tone. By the time I rode my old bicycle to Marlow High School, the sky had already started to drift with fine rain. The grand gates of that prestigious school blurred before my eyes. When I pushed open the teacher's office door, Stella was standing alone in the corner, her face deathly pale, her body trembling slightly. The moment she saw me, her eyes turned red, but she bit her lips so hard she refused to cry. Behind the desk, Ms. Turner pushed up her gold-rimmed glasses, her gaze sharp and cold behind the lenses. Next to her sat Principal Harris, smiling in a way that revealed nothing. Mrs. Carter, you're here. Miss Turner spoke first and pushed a sheet of paper toward me. This is the school's decision. Take a look. Black words on white paper. The most eye-catching part was the bold title. Disciplinary decision regarding Stella Carter's academic misconduct. The contents were even more heartless. During a critical recent exam, Stella Carter used a smartwatch to cheat. The offense was serious and had a bad influence. After discussion by the school board, it has been decided that she will be disqualified from the city-level outstanding student selection and expelled from school, with the matter to be reported to all schools in the city. My vision went black, and I nearly lost my footing. Cheating? Impossible. Stella would never do that. She has always earned her grades through her own hard work. The evidence is conclusive. Miss Turner sneered and pulled a transparent evidence bag out of the drawer. Inside was an ordinary smartwatch. On the day of the exam, the cameras showed her looking down at her watch multiple times. The tech department also recovered the watch's receiving records, and there was answer information transmitted from outside. Stella herself also admitted that the watch was hers. I admit the watch is mine. Stella finally couldn't hold back and shouted through tears, but I never used it to cheat. I wasn't even wearing it that day. I put it in the deepest part of my backpack. Someone framed me. Framed? Principal Harris spoke slowly, his voice oily with condescension. Mrs. Carter, we understand how you feel. But the school handles problems based on evidence. Right now, all the evidence points to Stella Carter. And, from what we know, children from single-parent families may indeed lack enough attention and guidance in some areas. It's understandable to make a mistake for a moment. But rules are rules. He stressed the words, single-parent family, like a poisonous thorn, stabbing straight into my deepest pain. What do you mean by that? My blood rushed to my head. Just because she comes from a single-parent family, does that mean she deserves to be framed? What kind of child Stella is, don't you know? How many times has she brought honor to the school? And now you're going to ruin her future just because of one camera and a record that can be faked? Miss Turner slapped the desk and stood up. Mrs. Carter. Watch your tone. This is a place for reason, not a place for you to throw a fit. Your daughter has a problem, and instead of reflecting on your own parenting, you're questioning the school's fairness? Like mother, like daughter. Her words were like icy spikes dipped in poison, stabbing through the reason I was trying to hold on to. I looked at Stella. Her small body trembled violently with anger and humiliation. Tears slid down silently, and the despair in her eyes broke my heart. Stella, let's go. I took my daughter's cold hand and didn't look again at those two hypocritical faces. I knew we would get no justice here. When we walked out of the office, the students and teachers we passed in the hallway all gave us strange looks, and the murmuring was like the buzz of flies. Even Stella's old classmates kept their distance from her. When we got home, the small apartment that had once been full of books and warmth now felt suffocating. Stella locked herself in her room, and the muffled sound of her crying cut at my heart like a dull knife. I sat in the living room, looking at the rain growing heavier outside the window, feeling cold all over. I remembered 6 years ago, when I had fled from another place full of power and coldness with Stella, who had only just learned to walk. I thought that if I hid in the ordinary noise of the city, I could buy peace. I had given up my once brilliant academic talent and willingly become a simple librarian, only asking that my daughter could grow up safe and happy. But why was the world even taking away that little humble wish? Mom. I didn't know when Stella had come out. Her face was still streaked with tears, and she threw herself into my arms, her voice hoarse. Why are they doing this? Ryan Brooks's grades aren't even as good as mine. Is it just because his dad donated money to the school? Mom, I didn't cheat. I really didn't. I held her tightly, my heart twisting like a knife. I know, and I believe you, Stella. Don't be afraid. Mom will get justice for you no matter what. At that moment, a heart that had been silent for many years seemed to slowly wake up inside me. I couldn't fall. My daughter was watching me. Over the next few days, I started fighting back. I went to government offices, and after hearing my account, the reception staff told me blankly to go home and wait for notice. Then nothing happened. I tried contacting the media, but the calls either didn't go through or I was politely told that they needed to verify things, and then there was nothing after that. Marlow High School's announcement saying the evidence was conclusive had already been released, and rumors spread at shocking speed. The neighbors looked at us with disdain and avoidance. Even at the library where I worked, there were whispers starting up. The director politely reminded me to be mindful of the impact and suggested I take temporary leave. Stella was getting worse and worse. She didn't dare go out and stayed curled up in her room all day, her eyes empty. That girl who had once been bright-eyed and hungry for knowledge was gone. What made me feel most hopeless was that I realized I was facing a net with no holes. Principal Harris, M.S. Turner, and the Brooks family behind the scenes had woven a huge web of connections, easily diffusing every appeal I made. That day, I gathered my courage again and went to the City Education Bureau, hoping to see someone higher up. Outside an office, I unexpectedly ran into Miss Turner and Ryan Brooks's father. The well-known local businessman, Mr. Brooks. They were laughing and talking as they came out with someone who looked like a leader. M.S. Turner spotted me and curled her lips into an undisguised sneer. Mr. Brooks swept a contemptuous glance over my cheap clothes, as if I were just an annoying bug. The official frowned and said to the staff beside him, "Why are all kinds of people allowed in here? Pay attention to the optics." At that moment, all my courage and persistence collapsed. I wasn't chasing the truth. I was throwing an egg at a rock. An overwhelming sense of powerlessness washed over me like a tide. I stood alone in front of the cold municipal building and watched them drive away. For the first time, I understood what despair really was. When I got home, Stella was curled up in the corner of the sofa and asked me softly, "Mom, is it because of me that you got dragged into this too? Maybe we should just forget it. I don't want to go to school anymore." No. I almost shouted it, but tears surged out of me uncontrollably. I held her. "Stella, we can't let this go. If we do, your whole life will be ruined. Even if I have to give up my life, I'll clear your name." But how could I fight? My strength, in front of them, was as small as a speck of dust. Just when I was about to be swallowed by despair, one afternoon while cleaning out old things, I accidentally found a long-forgotten iron box. Inside were several medals I had once won in math and physics competitions at home and abroad, now dulled with age. Under the medals was a photo. In the photo, a young me stood shoulder to shoulder with a young man in a white shirt, his eyes bright and sharp, on a university campus, both of us smiling with carefree brilliance. That was Daniel Shaw. Stella's father. 6 years ago, he vanished from our world as if he had evaporated, leaving behind only a vague, almost cruel breakup letter. Carrying a child, I endured immense pain and the gossip and pointing fingers around me before giving birth to Stella. I went from hating him to slowly trying to forget him, pouring all my love into my daughter. I had never thought about finding him. The name, and the world it might represent, was the past I had deliberately avoided. But right then, looking at the face in the photo, the face that had once been full of ideals and passion, and looking at my haggard daughter in my arms, who had been unjustly accused, a crazy and humble thought began to grow in my heart. Could he maybe still be willing to help us, even a little? Even if it was only because Stella was his blood? The thought made me feel ashamed, as if I had betrayed the persistence of the past 6 years. But I had no way back. I rummaged through everything until I finally found a number that had almost been forgotten, a private number he had once said, "No matter when you call this number, you'll be able to find me." With trembling fingers, I pressed the dial button. Hearing the ringing through the receiver, my heart pounded as if it might burst out of my chest. The phone rang for a long time. Just when I thought no one would answer and was about to hang up, someone finally picked up. "Hello?" It was a steady male voice, carrying a trace of barely noticeable caution. Not him. My heart sank. Of course. 6 years had passed. The number might have changed hands long ago. "Sorry, wrong number." My voice was hoarse as I prepared to hang up. "Wait." The other person's voice suddenly became urgent, even carrying a hint of unbelievable shock. "This number, may I ask, are you Mrs. Vivian Carter?" I froze. How did he know my name? "I am Vivian Carter." "Who are you?" "Thank God. You finally called this number." The other person sounded excited and relieved. Mrs. Carter, please wait. Don't hang up. I'll transfer you to Mr. Shaw right away. He's been waiting for your call. Mr. Shaw? Waiting for my call? Before I could react, I heard hurried footsteps and suppressed conversation on the other end. Then, a voice that I would remember to my grave, a voice I had not even dared to recall carefully in my dreams, came through with a tremor of disbelief and buried urgency, crossing 6 years of time and crashing hard into my ears. Vivian? Is that you? Vivian. It was Daniel Shaw. He was really still using this number. And he called me Vivian, the nickname only the closest people would use. The immense grievance and all the hardship I had borne alone for the past 6 years broke through in an instant. I covered my mouth so I wouldn't cry out, but tears still poured down. Daniel. I forced out a few words with all my strength, my voice broken beyond repair. Our daughter. Stella, she's being bullied. The rain outside picked up, heavy drops drumming rhythmically against the small glass panes of the kitchen window. Inside, the line went deathly silent after Daniel's terrifying promise. Vivian, Daniel's voice came through again, low and vibrating with a dark, contained fury that sent a shiver down her spine. Where are you? Give me the address. Vivian's hand shook so violently that she nearly dropped the phone. For 6 long years, she had imagined this moment, how she would scream at him, how she would demand to know why he vanished, why he left her alone in a cold hospital room, holding an infant with no father's name on the birth certificate. But looking at Stella's bedroom door, hearing the stifled, tragic sobs of a child whose world had been crushed by cruel, arrogant adults, every ounce of her pride dissolved into pure maternal fierce protection. We're at 1422 Maple Street, apartment 3B, Vivian whispered, her voice choking. Marlowe High School gave her until tomorrow morning to sign the voluntary withdrawal form, or they will permanently post her expulsion on the city's Unified Academic Registry for gross moral failure. Daniel, they ruined her. They broke her. They haven't ruined anything, Daniel's tone shifted, turning as cold and sharp as a forged blade. They just bought themselves an iron coffin. Stay inside. Keep the door locked. I am 30 minutes away. Daniel, wait, who are you now? What can you? The call disconnected. Vivian lowered her hand, staring at the blank screen. 6 years ago, Daniel Shaw was a brilliant but obscure postgraduate researcher in applied physics, always buried in dusty blueprints and complex theoretical equations. He was gentle, soft-spoken, and wore faded linen shirts. But the voice she had just heard on the phone belonged to a stranger, a man who sounded like he commanded armies, a man accustomed to tearing down mountains with a single word. She stood up, walked into Stella's room, and sat on the edge of the twin bed. She pulled her daughter into her arms. Mom? Stella looked up, her red-rimmed eyes wide with exhaustion and confusion. Who were you talking to? Vivian stroked her daughter's damp hair, pressing a kiss to her temple. Someone. Who is going to make sure nobody ever pushes you down again? Your father. Stella stiffened in her arms. My father? You said he died before I was born. I lied to protect us, Vivian said softly, tears pooling in her own eyes. Because I thought he abandoned us. But right now, I don't care about the past. If he can help us tear down the lies they built around you, I'll crawl to the ends of the earth. Outside, the quiet, middle-class neighborhood of Maple Street was shattered 20 minutes later by a low, thunderous roar. It wasn't thunder. It was the sound of heavy-duty engines. Vivian drew back the sheer curtains of her living room window and froze. Down on the rain-slick street, from matte black SUV escorts had cut off both ends of the avenue, their emergency strobes flashing silently in amber and red. In the middle of the line sat a sleek, custom-built heavy armored sedan bearing a dark, insignia-less license plate. Neighbors opened their windows, peering out in stunned confusion. The rear door of the armored sedan opened. A tall man stepped out into the pouring rain. A dark charcoal suit fit his broad shoulders perfectly, draped beneath a heavy trench coat. His hair was trimmed short, neat, with subtle silver strands at his temples that hadn't been there 6 years ago. His jawline was sharp, his posture impossibly straight, and his eyes, cold steel gray, scanned the apartment building like an apex predator evaluating a battlefield. Behind him, 2 men in crisp black tactical suits stood holding black umbrellas. But Daniel brushed them aside with a single flick of his wrist. He didn't care about the rain. He walked directly into the lobby of Vivian's building. Seconds later, heavy, deliberate footsteps sounded in the hallway outside. Apartment 3B. Knock. Knock. 2 firm, precise raps. Vivian's heart slammed against her ribs. She took a deep breath, walked to the door, and pulled it open. The hallway light framed Daniel Shaw. Up close, the 6 years of separation hit Vivian like a physical blow. The boyish, gentle academic was gone. In his place stood a man who radiated terrifying, unyielding authority. Deep lines were etched around his eyes, the marks of a man who had carried the weight of unspeakable secrets and absolute power. Daniel stopped at the threshold. His steel-gray eyes locked onto Vivian. For a fraction of a second, the icy wall in his expression shattered, revealing a raw, agonizing tide of regret, grief, and longing. Vivian, he breathed, his voice rough. Daniel, she said, her voice barely audible. His gaze shifted slightly, looking past her shoulder into the living room, where Stella was timidly peeking around the bedroom doorway. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His chest heaved when he saw the young girl, with Vivian's soft dark eyes and his own faint jaw structure, his hands clenched into tight fists until his knuckles turned white. He took a slow step into the apartment, gently closing the door behind him. He didn't offer an embrace. He knew he hadn't earned it. Instead, his gaze dropped to Stella's small right hand, which was resting on the doorframe. His eyes narrowed instantly. Her wrist. Vivian looked down. Red, purple bruises were shaped like thick fingers around Stella's delicate skin, the marks left when Ms. Turner and Principal Harris's security guard had forcibly hauled her out of the classroom to seize her belongings. Daniel walked over slowly, dropping to one knee in front of Stella. The terrifying aura surrounding him melted away in an instant, replaced by a deep, terrifying tenderness. "Does it hurt, sweetheart?" Daniel asked softly. Stella shrank back slightly toward Vivian, but she shook her head, biting her lip. "No. It hurts more that they called me a thief and a cheater. I didn't do it. I promise I didn't." Daniel reached out, his big, warm hand lingering barely a millimeter away from her bruised wrist, afraid to cause her pain. "I know you didn't." "How do you know?" Stella whispered, her voice trembling. "Nobody believes us," the principal said. "He said because I don't have a father, I don't have a upbringing, so I must be bad." A dark, lethal stillness descended upon the room. The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Daniel stood up slowly. When he turned back to Vivian, the warmth was completely gone, replaced by a quiet, absolute fury that made the breath catch in her throat. "Who touched her?" Daniel asked quietly. "Ms. Turner, her homeroom teacher, pulled her out of her seat," Vivian said, her hands shaking as she pulled out the folded paper from her coat pocket. "And Principal Harris signed this expulsion notice. They claimed Stella used a smartwatch to receive test answers. But Stella's watch was an old, basic model I bought her 3 years ago. It doesn't even have a cellular module. They showed a recovered electronic record from the school server, but they refused to let me inspect it." Daniel held out his hand. Vivian placed the expulsion notice in his palm. He didn't even look at the paper. He simply folded it neatly and slid it into his coat pocket. "A simple school principal and a teacher," Daniel murmured softly, a terrifyingly cold smile touching the corners of his lips. "They dare lay their hands on my daughter, drag her name through the mud, and use her lack of a father to crush her?" He turned toward the door. "Daniel," Vivian called out, stepping forward to catch his sleeve. "What are you going to do?" The Brooks family, the boy who actually cheated, Ryan Brooks, his father is Howard Brooks. He's a major donor to the school board and owns the largest real estate developer in the district. He has connections with the District Education Bureau. You can't just fight them with violence, they'll put you in jail." Daniel stopped and looked down at Vivian's hand on his sleeve. A bitter, agonizing expression flashed across his face. "Vivian," he said softly, reaching up to gently cover her hand with his. 6 years ago, I vanished because the state took me into the Deep Sky Defense Project. I spent 6 years living underground, designing the neural command architecture for this nation's dark network intelligence. I gave up my life, my name, and the woman I loved to build a shield for this country." He stepped closer, his eyes burning with an intense, unshakable heat. "I built that shield so people like our daughter could walk in the light. And if the people inside that shield use their pathetic little power to ruin my child, I will tear the shield down and burn them to ashes." He turned to the man standing respectfully outside the open door, a sharp-looking man in a dark suit holding an encrypted military laptop. "Marcus," Daniel commanded, his voice echoing down the stairwell like iron colliding with iron. "Sir," the man straightened immediately. "First, freeze all commercial assets, land development permits, and bank credit lines of the Brooks Real Estate Group. I want Howard Brooks bankrupt before sunrise." "Understood, Director." "Second, access the city's educational server network. Override Marlow High School's administrative authorization. Extract every byte of video footage, network logs, and email correspondence from Principal Harris and Teacher Turner over the last 48 hours. It will take 3 minutes, Director. Third, Daniel's eyes turned pitch black, devoid of any mercy. Contact the Commander of the Regional Garrison and the Chief of the Provincial Supervision Commission. Tell them that Daniel Shaw is holding a personal inquiry at Marlow High School tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock sharp. Tell them to bring their full details. Marcus bowed deeply. Consider it done, Director Shaw. Vivian stood frozen in the doorway, her mind reeling. Director Shaw? Deep Sky Defense Project? Daniel turned back to Vivian and Stella. His harsh tone dissolved into gentle warmth once more. Rest tonight, Vivian. Get some sleep, Stella, he said quietly. Tomorrow morning, I will personally walk you both into Marlow High School. And everyone who made my daughter cry will kneel down and beg for her forgiveness. The night passed in an agonizing blur for Vivian, while Stella finally fell into a deep, exhausted sleep, comforted by the shadow of the heavy black SUVs parked quietly outside their apartment building like silent guardians. Vivian sat by the window, watching Daniel. He didn't sleep. He stayed in his armored vehicle down on the street, the dim glow of multiple tactical screens illuminating his silhouette through the tinted glass. People came and went, men in formal government suits, officers in dark, unbadged uniforms, delivering thick folders and secure hard drives. At 6 a.m., a soft knock came at her door. Vivian opened it to find a polite young woman in a tailored suit holding 2 large garment bags and a freshly brewed thermos of coffee. Good morning, Mrs. Carter, the woman said respectfully. I am Assistant Chen from Director Shaw's personal office. Director Shaw requested that you and Miss Stella wear these for this morning's assembly. Vivian unzipped the bags. Inside were 2 exquisitely tailored outfits made of fine dark wool, elegant, dignified, and modest, yet carrying an undeniable aura of quiet prestige. By 7:30 a.m., the sleek black sedan was waiting at the curb. When Vivian and Stella stepped out of the apartment building, Daniel was standing by the open door. He wore a crisp, tailored suit pinned with a tiny silver and black lapel pin, an emblem featuring a stylized shield crossed by an orbit ring. To 99% of the population, it meant nothing. But to those at the absolute peak of power, that pin represented the highest level of national security clearance in the country. Did you rest? Daniel asked softly, bowing his head slightly as Vivian approached. I couldn't, Vivian said honestly, looking into his eyes. Daniel, is this real? What have you been doing for 6 years? Serving a sentence I didn't choose, Daniel replied, his voice heavy with a deep sadness. When the state discovered my research paper on quantum network encryption, 2 black cars pulled up to my dormitory. They gave me a choice. Enter the dark project immediately to construct the national cyber defense infrastructure, or face permanent detention to prevent the technology from leaking. I wasn't even allowed to send you a text message. My father died 3 years ago, and I wasn't allowed to attend his funeral. Vivian's breath hitched. The anger that had festered in her heart for 6 years suddenly felt hollow, replaced by an overwhelming ache. Why didn't you try to find us once you were out? She asked quietly. I only gained full clearance and freedom of movement 3 days ago, Daniel looked at Stella, who was holding Vivian's hand tightly. The first thing I did was search the municipal civil registry for your name. And then, your call came. He extended his hand, offering a gentle smile to Stella. Shall we go clear your name, Stella? Stella looked at her mother. Vivian gave a reassuring nod. Slowly, Stella reached out and placed her small hand in Daniel's large, warm palm. Okay, Stella murmured. At 7:50 a.m., Marlow High School was buzzing with morning activity. Parents were dropping off their children at the grand iron gates. Banners hung across the main administrative building, proudly declaring, congratulations to Marlow High School for winning the annual Regional Academic Excellence Award. Inside the opulent, wood-paneled conference room on the 3rd floor, a small party was taking place. Principal Harris sat at the head of the polished mahogany table, swirling a cup of expensive black tea. Beside him sat Ms. Turner, looking pleased with herself. And across from them sat Howard Brooks, a portly man with a thick gold watch and a tailored Italian suit, along with his arrogant son, Ryan Brooks. Principal Harris, I must thank you for your swift handling of that unpleasant matter yesterday, Howard Brooks said with a wide, oily smile, sliding a thick brown envelope across the table. My son Ryan was under a lot of pressure for the upcoming city scholarship. That Carter girl. Her grades were always artificially inflated. It's good that you caught her cheating early. Principal Harris smoothly slid the envelope under a pile of folders, his smile widening. It is our duty, Mr. Brooks. Marlowe High School has a reputation to uphold. We cannot allow children from low-income, fatherless backgrounds to ruin the school's prestige with dishonest methods. The evidence is airtight. Her expulsion order will be officially broadcast across the campus public announcement system at 8 o'clock sharp. Miss Turner sniffed disdainfully, adjusting her gold-rimmed glasses. Her mother actually had the nerve to throw a fit in my office yesterday, claimed Ryan. Framed her. Ha. As if a fine young man like Ryan, from a family of such high standing, would need to copy answers from a girl whose mother works as a low-level library clerk. Ryan Brooks smirked, leaning back in his chair while playing with his high-end smartphone. She's just a loser. She thought she could get first place in the finals. I just took what belonged to me. Well said, my boy. Howard Brooks laughed, clapping his son on the shoulder. Power and resources are part of talent. That librarian thinks the world runs on fairness? How naive. Just as Howard's laughter echoed through the room, the heavy oak doors of the conference room were suddenly thrown wide open with a violent crack. The hinges groaned as the double doors slammed against the walls. Principal Harris jumped out of his chair, spilling his tea all over his desk. What is the meaning of this? Who gave you permission to break into? He stopped dead in his tracks. 3 tall men in dark tactical suits stepped into the room, instantly securing the corners. Behind them walked Vivian, dressed in her dark wool coat, holding Stella's hand. And walking alongside them was Daniel Shaw. Miss Turner's eyes widened in recognition of Vivian, her face twisting into immediate disgust. Mrs. Carter? Are you insane? You brought thugs into the administrative wing? Security. Call security immediately. Don't bother, Daniel said calmly, his voice echoing in the spacious room like a tolling bell. Your security personnel have been relieved of their duties. Howard Brooks stood up, his face red with anger, adjusting his designer tie. Who the hell are you? Do you know who I am? I am Howard Brooks, chairman of Brooks Development. One phone call from me to the district police chief, and all of you will be rotting in a cell by noon. Daniel didn't even look at Howard. He walked smoothly over to the head of the conference table, pulled out the high-backed leather chair, and gestured for Vivian and Stella to sit down. Sit, Vivian. Stella, Daniel said gently. Once they were seated, Daniel stood behind his daughter, resting his hands lightly on the back of her chair. He finally turned his gaze toward Principal Harris and Miss Turner. 8 o'clock is approaching, Daniel said softly, checking his plain black watch. Principal Harris, I believe you were about to broadcast my daughter's expulsion notice? Principal Harris sneered, regaining his composure. He assumed this was just Vivian's low-class relative trying to intimidate them. That's right. Harris barked, slapping his hand on the desk. Stella Carter violated academic integrity. The proof is absolute. She brought an unauthorized receiver into the exam room. We recovered the transmission log from the school server. It's over. No amount of posturing will change her expulsion. Is that so? Daniel smiled. It was a cold, dark smile that made Principal Harris's stomach drop. Daniel raised his hand and snapped his fingers. Marcus stepped forward, placing a sleek black tactical tablet onto the conference table and pressing a single button. The massive projector screen on. The wall behind Principal Harris suddenly flickered to life, overriding the school's internal display system. What is this? Miss Turner gasped. On the screen, high-definition video footage began playing. The timestamp showed 2 days ago, 5:30 p.m., after school hours. The footage showed Miss Turner entering the empty examination hall with a master key. She walked directly to Stella's desk, unzipped Stella's backpack resting in the cubby, and slipped a black smartwatch into the bottom compartment. The room fell dead silent. Miss Turner's face went from pale to deathly white in a fraction of a second. That's a deep fake. That's fabricated video. Principal Harris, they hacked our system. Wait, there's more, Marcus said dryly, tapping the tablet again. The screen shifted to a digital line trace analysis of the school's internal Wi-Fi network. At 10:15 a.m. during the mathematics exam, Marcus read from the screen in a flat, clinical tone. The signal transmitting exam answers was not sent to a smartwatch. It was transmitted directly to a high-frequency receiver embedded inside a customized luxury pen. Serial number, GP 9902. Purchased 4 days ago. By Howard Brooks. The camera zoomed in on the table right in front of Ryan Brooks. Resting next to his elbow was the exact same silver luxury pen. Ryan gasped, his hands trembling as he hastily tried to shove the pen into his pocket. You lied to me? Howard Brooks whipped around, glaring at his son in utter shock. Dad. I didn't want to fail. Ryan stammered, tears springing to his eyes. You said if I didn't get top 3, you'd cut off my allowance. Vivian sat frozen, watching the absolute destruction of their lives. Tears of relief flowed silently down her cheeks. Stella gripped her mother's hand, her eyes wide as she looked at her father standing tall and imposing behind her. Fabricated evidence, Daniel said, his voice dropping an octave, ringing with terrifying authority. Framing a minor verbal abuse, physical assault, and psychological torture of an innocent student. He stepped toward Ms. Turner. The sheer physical presence of the man made the woman stumble backward until her knees hit her chair and she collapsed into it, gasping for air. You told my wife that children from single-parent families lack discipline. Daniel whispered, leaning down until his eyes were level with hers. You said it was natural for them to have bad character. Tell me, Ms. Turner, what kind of character does a teacher have when she accepts a $50,000 bribe to ruin a child's life? A financial bank transaction receipt popped up on the giant screen behind them, showing a direct transfer from Howard Brooks's private offshore account to Ms. Turner's personal bank node, dated 3 days ago. Ms. Turner's breath hitched, her throat completely dry. She looked at Principal Harris frantically. Principal. Help me. Principal Harris was sweating profusely, his collar suddenly feeling far too tight. He fumbled for his desk phone. This is illegal. You accessed confidential school files. I am calling the Education Bureau right now. Director Vance is a close personal friend of mine. You people are going to jail. Director Vance? Daniel tilted his head slightly. You mean Gerald Vance, chief of the Regional Education Bureau? Before Harris could punch in the numbers, the thick oak doors of the conference room were slammed open once again. This time, a group of men in dark gray formal suits entered, led by a middle-aged man with a pale, panicked face. Behind them stood 4 armed officers from the State Supervision Commission. Principal Harris's eyes lit up with desperate hope. Director Vance. Thank God. You're here. These terrorists broke into the school. They hacked our servers. An slap. A resounding slap echoed through the conference room. Director Vance had rushed forward and delivered a furious, open-handed slap across Principal Harris's face, knocking the principal onto the floor. Shut your mouth, you foolish brute. Director Vance screamed, his voice cracking with pure terror. Harris held his swollen cheek, completely bewildered. Director Vance. Why? Director Vance didn't even look at Harris. He turned toward Daniel Shaw, his knees trembling so violently he could barely stand. He bowed deeply, a full 90-degree bow of absolute submission. Director Shaw. Vance's voice shook like a leaf in a storm. I arrived as fast as I could. I had no idea this wretched place was harboring such corruption. The District Education Bureau has already revoked Harris's credentials and placed the entire administrative board under state investigation. Howard Brooks, who had been standing arrogantly by the window, suddenly felt his cell phone vibrate wildly in his pocket. He pulled it out with shaking hands. Hello? Howard hissed into the phone. Mr. Brooks. We're ruined, his chief financial officer's hysterical voice blasted through the speaker so loudly that everyone in the room could hear it. The State Revenue Service just froze all our corporate accounts. The Banking Regulatory Commission has suspended our credit lines. The Department of Land and Resources has canceled all 6 of our active construction permits. Our stock is down 70% in pre-market trading. We are declaring bankruptcy. Howard's phone slipped from his fingers, crashing onto the carpet. His legs gave out, and he slid down the wall, staring at Daniel in absolute horror. Who are you? Howard whispered, his voice trembling with deep existential fear. Who the hell are you? Daniel didn't answer him. He didn't need to. He turned to Marcus. Hand the evidence over to the Supervision Commission. I want Principal Harris and Ms. Turner prosecuted under the maximum severity clause for corrupting state-level educational integrity and criminal defamation of a minor. Minimum sentence, 15 years without parole. No. Please. Mrs. Carter, forgive me. Ms. Turner suddenly threw herself out of her chair, dropping to her knees and crawling toward Vivian. She grabbed the edge of Vivian's coat, weeping hysterically. I was wrong. I was greedy. Please. Speak for me. I'll apologize to Stella on national television. Don't ruin my life. Vivian looked down at the woman who, just 24 hours ago, had treated her like garbage, who had mocked her daughter's lack of a father, who had tried to destroy Stella's future without a shred of remorse. Vivian pulled her coat hem out of Miss Turner's hand, her expression cold and resolute. You didn't care about ruining my daughter's life, Vivian said, her voice firm and clear. You reap what you sow. Take them away, Marcus commanded cold-bloodedly. The officers from the Supervision Commission stepped forward, snapping heavy steel handcuffs onto Principal Harris, Miss Turner, and Howard Brooks. Ryan Brooks burst into loud, pathetic tears as his father was dragged away, cursing and screaming in despair. Within minutes, the noisy, corrupt assembly was cleared out, leaving only the quiet dignity of the room. Director Vance stood sweating in the corner, holding his breath, waiting for his own judgment. Daniel looked at Vance. Director Vance. Yes, Director Shaw. Vance squeaked. Clean up this school. Appoint an interim principal with clean records. And if I hear of a single student being discriminated against in this district ever again, it will never happen. I swear on my life, Director Shaw. Vance bowed repeatedly, retreating out of the room like a humbled servant. The heavy doors closed once more. Silence returned to the room. The contrast between the chaos of 10 minutes ago and the absolute stillness now was staggering. Vivian sat in her chair, her chest rising and falling slowly as she processed everything. Stella looked up at Daniel, her young mind trying to reconcile the gentle father who had held her hand with the terrifying force of nature that had just dismantled powerful adults with a few quiet sentences. Daniel walked over to Stella. He dropped to his knees once more, taking her small hand in his. It's over, Stella, Daniel said gently, his eyes filled with profound tenderness. Nobody will ever call you a cheater again. Nobody will ever insult you or your mother again. I promise you. Stella looked at her father. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of pain or humiliation. They were tears of relief. She threw her arms around Daniel's neck. Daniel froze for a fraction of a second, unaccustomed to such pure, unreserved affection after 6 years in deep isolation, before he wrapped his powerful arms around his daughter, holding her close to his heart. Vivian watched them, her hand covering her mouth as quiet tears spilled down her cheeks. After a long moment, Daniel stood up, holding Stella in his arms. He looked at Vivian. We need to talk, Vivian, Daniel said softly. About everything. An hour later, they were sitting in a private, high-end tea house overlooking the city's central river. The entire establishment had been cleared out by Daniel's security detail. Stella was sitting at a nearby table with assistant Shen, happily eating delicate pastries and sketching in a new sketchbook that Shen had brought for her. Vivian sat across from Daniel, a steaming cup of jasmine tea between them. Now, tell me the truth, Vivian said quietly, staring into Daniel's steel gray eyes. All of it. Daniel took a deep breath, leaning back in his chair. The dark armor he wore in front of the world seemed to slip away, leaving behind the exhausted, brilliant man Vivian had loved 6 years ago. 6 years ago, our country's orbital defense network was hit by a massive, unknown quantum intrusion, Daniel began, his voice low. The state top tier intelligence agencies realized that foreign entities had breached our core communications. The government initiated Project Deep Sky, a black budget initiative to construct a completely unhackable, state-level neural security grid. He looked down at his teacup. I was the primary author of the foundational algorithm. The night before I vanished, agents from the Supreme Defense Council arrived at my lab. They told me that my identity, my location, and my personal connections were being targeted by foreign intelligence assets. If I stayed with you, you and our unborn child would become primary targets for leverage or assassination. Vivian's breath hitched. Targets? Yes, Daniel said, his jaw tightening. They forced me to sign the state secrecy covenant. I was taken to an underground installation 300 meters beneath the mountains in the northwest. I was stripped of my phone, my internet access, and my real name. For 6 years, I lived in a sealed bunker, working 18 hours a day to complete the national grid. He looked up, his eyes filled with immense pain. I tried to leave 3 times, Vivian. The second time, I was placed in solitary confinement for 2 months. They told me that if I broke security protocol, not only would I face treason charges, but they would execute black-white protocols on everyone associated with me to clear the leak risk. I had to stay dead to keep you alive. Vivian sat frozen. The bitter resentment that had burned inside her for 6 years, the feeling of being tossed aside, abandoned, and left to raise a child. alone, suddenly shattered into 1,000 pieces. She remembered the nights she sat in the dark apartment, crying as she nursed Stella, hating Daniel for leaving her. She remembered the humiliating whispers of neighbors, the cold glances at the hospital, the endless struggle to pay rent on a librarian's humble salary. And all that time, Daniel was trapped beneath a mountain, working in silence to keep them safe. Why now? Vivian whispered, her voice cracking. How were you allowed to come back? Because 3 days ago, the deep sky grid went fully operational, Daniel said. A faint, proud smile touching his lips before turning bitter again. The project is complete. The state awarded me the National Medal of Honor and granted me absolute authority within the strategic defense apparatus. I demanded immediate release from isolation. The first thing I asked for was the file on Vivian Carter. He reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers, hesitation evident in his fingers. When I saw that you were living in a tiny apartment, working as a librarian, struggling every single day, I felt more hatred for myself than I have ever felt in my life, Daniel whispered, his voice trembling with raw emotion. And when you called me, when you told me our daughter was being destroyed, I swore that I would use every ounce of power the state gave me to protect you both. Vivian looked down at his broad, warm hand. Slowly, gently, she slid her fingers forward and closed her hand over his. Daniel shuddered, a heavy breath escaping his chest as if a mountain's weight had finally been lifted off his shoulders. Daniel, Vivian said softly, tears glistening in her eyes. You saved Stella. Today. You restored her pride. But 6 years is a long time. We aren't the same people we were in college. I know, Daniel said softly, wrapping his fingers tightly around hers. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. I don't expect you to jump back into my life as if nothing happened. But please, give me a chance to be a father to Stella. Give me a chance to earn back my place beside you. Vivian looked over at Stella, who was laughing happily as Assistant Chin showed her how to fold an origami crane. For the first time in 6 years, the dark, suffocating dark cloud hanging over Vivian's life had completely cleared, revealing brilliant, warm sunshine. You already started, Vivian smiled through her tears. Although the main culprits at Marlowe High School had been brought to justice, the waves generated by Daniel's intervention were far from over. That evening, the entire city was shaken by a massive news broadcast. The municipal television station released an emergency investigative report. Brooks Real Estate Group collapses amid massive corruption, tax evasion, and bribery scandal, former Principal Harris and teacher Turner arrested. The report publicly vindicated Stella Carter, praising her exceptional academic record and condemning the corrupt staff who had tried to frame an innocent student. The City Education Bureau officially issued a citywide public apology to Stella and Vivian Carter, promising a complete overhaul of the school system's ethics oversight. In the small neighborhood on Maple Street, the neighbors who had previously whispered behind Vivian's back were dumbfounded. They watched in shock as team after team of professional renovators, escorted by polite security personnel, moved into Vivian's apartment building, not to displace anyone, but to completely modernize the entire building's infrastructure, security, and heating systems as a gift from an undisclosed national defense contractor. The director of the city library, who had previously advised Vivian to take temporary leave, personally arrived at Vivian's door with a massive bouquet of flowers and a formal promotion offer to head of archives, complete with a tenfold salary increase. Vivian politely declined the promotion, choosing instead to hand in her official resignation. She had decided it was time for a new chapter. 2 weeks later, the morning sun shone brightly over a beautiful, private residential estate nestled near the city's eastern mountains, a secure, serene community reserved for senior researchers and national defense directors. In the spacious, sunlit garden behind a beautiful 2-story villa, 8-year-old Stella was running across the lush green grass, holding the string of a bright red kite soaring high into the clear blue sky. Look, Dad. Look how high it's going. Stella shouted happily, her laughter echoing through the crisp morning air. Daniel, wearing a simple gray sweater and comfortable trousers, looking remarkably like the gentle scholar Vivian had fallen in love with years ago, stood nearby, watching her with a bright, contented smile. Keep the string taut, Stella. Daniel called out, his voice filled with warm, easy joy. Adjust for the wind direction. Vivian walked out onto the wooden patio, holding 2 cups of freshly brewed coffee. She wore a soft cream sweater, her hair tied up casually. She looked healthier, happier, and younger than she had in years. She walked over to Daniel and handed him a cup. Thank you, Daniel murmured, taking the cup and wrapping his free arm around her waist, pulling her softly against his side. Vivian didn't pull away. She rested her head comfortably against his broad shoulder, taking a sip of her warm coffee. The new school called this morning, Vivian said softly. The director of the National Science Academy Elementary School said Stella's placement scores were the highest they've seen in 5 years. She starts next Monday. Of course she did, Daniel said proudly, kissing the top of Vivian's head. She has her mother's brilliant mind. And her father's stubbornness, Vivian countered with a gentle laugh. They stood together in peaceful silence, watching their daughter chase the kite across the emerald grass. The nightmare of Marlowe High School, the 6 years of cold loneliness, the painful tears, and the cruel lies were all behind them now. The shield that Daniel had spent 6 years building beneath the earth was no longer just protecting a nation, it was surrounding his family, holding them safe, warm, and unbroken in the brilliant light of a brand new day. Daniel? Vivian murmured softly after a long moment. Don't ever vanish again. Daniel tightened his arm around her, pressing his lips gently against hers in a slow, deep, unshakable promise. Never again, Daniel whispered against her lips. I am home.